Are we witnessing the dawn of a conflict that could ripple from Ukraine's battlefields to the Indo-Pacific? North Korea, one of the world's most secretive regimes, has thrown a curveball by sending thousands of troops to bolster Russia's war in Ukraine. But what's catching the world's attention isn't just Pyongyang's actions, it's Beijing's reaction. This unexpected move sparks speculation about how these soldiers will be used and create ripple effects across global geopolitics, especially in East Asia. Could this unexpected alliance be the spark that pulls the Indo-Pacific into the chaos of Europe's war? The stakes have never been higher for a region already brimming with rivalries. And what does this mean for the fragile balance of global power? Let's dive in. When Russia first invaded Ukraine back in 2022, it had big plans. Plans to overwhelm Kiev quickly and cement its dominance. But things didn't go as expected. The war dragged on, and as Russian losses piled up, cracks began to show. Faced with a workforce crisis and a rising death toll, Putin started calling on his friends for help. First, it was Iran, providing drones to prop up Russia's faltering efforts. But drones can only do so much. Putin needed boots on the ground, soldiers to keep the fight going. And that's where North Korea came in. North Korea has provided Russia with troops, and according to reports, about 12,000 soldiers have traveled from Pyongyang to Moscow's battlefronts. Among them are 500 elite special forces, soldiers trained in infiltration and sabotage. These aren't your average troops. They've been prepared to endure physical and psychological extremes. However, while they might look formidable on paper, their deployment presents challenges that even Putin might not have anticipated. From language barriers to logistical issues, integrating North Korea's soldiers into Russia's war machine is no simple task. So, how did this surprising alliance come to be? Let's start with the apparent problem: communication. North Korean troops don't speak Russian, and cultural differences only complicate matters. Leaked audio recordings from the front lines reveal Russian soldiers openly venting their frustration about working with their new colleagues. And here's where it gets worse. Every group of 30 North Korean soldiers needs one interpreter and 3 officers just to manage them. Talk about inefficiency. From an already stretched Russian military, this arrangement is anything but ideal, adding another layer of chaos to an already desperate situation. But why would North Korea step into this conflict? The answer lies in money and power. Moscow reportedly pays Pyongyang $2,000 per soldier per month, most of which ends up in Kim Jong-un's pocket. Beyond the financial gain, North Korea is also seeking access to advanced Russian military technology, which Moscow has historically been reluctant to share. The partnership is a desperate attempt for Russia to solve its workforce crisis, facing staggering losses, over 600,000 casualties since the war began. Putin has to turn to North Korea to fill the gaps. Now, you might wonder, how would this alliance between North Korea and Russia be a problem for China? Aren't they all on the same team? Well, geopolitics is rarely that straightforward. What seems like a victory for Pyongyang and Moscow on the surface is causing serious complications behind the scenes, and Beijing is feeling the heat. China's relationship with North Korea is all about balance and control, but this new partnership with Russia is threatening to tip the scales. And for Xi Jinping, that's a headache he didn't ask for. For Beijing, Pyongyang is a critical buffer zone, a geographical and political shield against U.S. influence. While South Korea and Japan firmly aligned with Washington, North Korea acts as a protective barrier, keeping American troops and military bases from inching right up to China's doorstep. And it doesn't stop there. The Korean Peninsula is a strategic hotspot at the crossroads of significant powers. Control over this region means influence over vital shipping lanes, military positioning, and the balance of power in Northeast Asia. A stable and compliant North Korea has always been the key to managing this delicate equation for China. But now, that carefully managed balance is under threat. North Korea's growing closeness with Russia is shifting the dynamics in ways Beijing never anticipated. From cozying up to Moscow and sending troops to Ukraine, Pyongyang is not only challenging China's influence, but also raising the stakes for regional stability. For Xi Jinping, this isn't just a diplomatic inconvenience. It's a potential flashpoint that could unravel years of painstakingly crafted strategy. Why does this matter? Let's explain. North Korea's involvement in Ukraine is like lighting a geopolitical firecracker in East Asia. It risks drawing the Western attention that China is desperate to avoid. Picture this: the US, South Korea, Japan, and other countries coming together to form a stronger military partnership, like an Asian NATO. For Beijing, that directly threatens its regional influence, a nightmare it's desperate to avoid. Then there's the problem of control, or losing it. China has worked hard for years to prevent Kim Jong-un from acquiring advanced weapons, worried that doing so would make North Korea bolder and destabilize the Korean peninsula. But now, with Russia stepping in to share military technology, China's hold over its unpredictable neighbor is weakening. And then, there's the issue of perception. North Korea sending troops to Ukraine and getting closer to Russia puts China in a tough spot. If Beijing is seen as supporting this alliance, it risks harming its multi-billion-dollar trade ties with the West, relationships it desperately needs. But if it speaks out too strongly, it risks pushing away two allies, Russia and North Korea. For Xi Jinping, it's a no-win situation. He's now trying to protect China's image as a steady global leader while navigating a geopolitical mess spinning out of control. For decades, China and North Korea have had an uneasy dependency relationship. Pyongyang relies on Beijing for almost everything: food, fuel, and access to international trade. In return, China uses this leverage to keep its unpredictable neighbor in check, ensuring the regime remains stable and avoiding the collapse that could trigger a humanitarian crisis on its doorstep. But let's be honest, this isn't exactly a smooth partnership. North Korea's relentless pursuit of nuclear weapons and ballistic missile programs has tested China's patience time and again. It's always been a high-stakes balancing act for Beijing, maintaining stability in the region while asserting its dominance in East Asia. Now, things have gone from tricky to downright messy. By sending troops to Ukraine, North Korea isn't just embarrassing China, it's throwing Beijing's carefully crafted strategy into chaos. Pyongyang's boldness is disrupting the fragile balance China has worked so hard to maintain, pulling Beijing closer to a conflict it desperately wants to avoid. It's not just the diplomatic problems that have Xi Jinping on edge. North Korea's growing ties with Russia could weaken China's hold over Kim Jong-un's regime. Reports that Moscow shares advanced military technology with Pyongyang are especially troubling for Beijing. If North Korea becomes more confident and unpredictable, it could destabilize the Korean peninsula, something China has worked hard to avoid for years. Beijing's unease was on full display at the recent BRICS summit. Reports suggest Xi Jinping delivered a clear warning to Vladimir Putin. Dragging other countries, especially North Korea, deeper into the conflict is risky. China wants no part of Pyongyang's growing involvement, which could bring unwanted Western focus to East Asia. Picture this: the US, South Korea, Japan, and other regional powers forming a more potent military alliance, like an Asian NATO. For China, this is a worst-case scenario. North Korea's actions are shaking the region, strengthening Western alliances, and challenging Beijing's influence. Xi Jinping is in a tough spot. Speaking out too strongly could alienate key allies like North Korea and Russia. Staying silent, however, risks making China look complicit and jeopardizing its valuable trade ties with the West. It's a no-win situation for Beijing's leader, who must manage this growing crisis while protecting China's image as a stabilizing power. By sending troops to Ukraine, Kim Jong-un is sending a clear message. He's ready to act on his terms, regardless of Beijing's wishes. His growing ties with Moscow aren't just a shift, but a direct challenge to Xi Jinping's leadership. This worries China because this alliance could shake the entire region's stability. If the war in Ukraine spills into the Indo-Pacific, it could draw in countries like South Korea, Japan, and the US. For China, this means dealing with threats on its borders and complicating its long-term plans for Taiwan and the South China Sea. Xi's unease was evident at the recent BRICS summit. Reports suggest he sent a strong message to Vladimir Putin, urging de-escalation and cautioning against dragging other nations into the conflict. Taking such a public stand shows just how high the stakes have become for a country like China, which usually prefers quiet diplomacy. China's concerns go far beyond geopolitics. They extend into the economic heart of its global strategy. With trade relationships with the US and Europe forming a cornerstone of its economy, Beijing can't afford to be seen as complicit in North Korea's actions, even indirectly. Such a perception could seriously jeopardize these critical ties and put billions of dollars at stake. It's not just China raising concerns about the North Korea-Russia partnership. The US has issued a sharp warning, with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin calling this alliance a serious risk. He pointed out that North Korea's involvement could lengthen and broaden the conflict in Ukraine, potentially triggering a dangerous domino effect. The fear? Other nations might follow suit, making unpredictable moves that could tip the balance of global power. South Korea is equally worried. Officials there suspect Pyongyang might be eyeing advanced Russian technology as part of this deal. Things like intercontinental ballistic missiles or tactical nuclear weapons. If true, this could send shockwaves across the Korean peninsula and the Indo-Pacific region, fueling an already volatile situation. The White House has also weighed in, making it clear that any North Korean troops fighting in Ukraine would be treated as legitimate military targets. This stark warning underlines just how dangerous the situation is, and how close it is to spiraling out of control. If US-supplied weapons are used against these forces, it would be a significant escalation, drawing even more players into the war. For Beijing, this growing North Korea-Russia alignment is a severe headache. It's eroding China's influence over Pyongyang, pushing the region closer to a tighter US-led coalition. With alliances shifting and tensions rising, China is becoming increasingly cornered in a high-stakes game where every move carries enormous risks. Russia's potential assistance to North Korea's nuclear weapons program in exchange for military support is a development that could dramatically escalate regional tensions. If Pyongyang's atomic ambitions gain momentum, it's not just a challenge for global non-proliferation, it's a direct threat to the fragile security landscape of East Asia. South Korea might respond by ramping up its military capabilities, edging closer to developing nuclear weapons, a move that would break with its long-standing reliance on US protection. Traditionally committed to its pacifist constitution, Japan might feel compelled to expand its defense capabilities further, signaling a significant shift in the region's military dynamics. For the United States, this would mean deploying more advanced military assets to the Indo-Pacific, making the stakes higher. An arms race of this magnitude would leave China in an unenviable position. Despite Beijing's consistent opposition to nuclear proliferation, it could find itself unable to prevent its allies or adversaries from accelerating their militarization efforts. The ripple effects don't stop there. The crisis threatens to divert China's attention and resources from two of its most critical strategic priorities, Taiwan and the South China Sea. As the US and its allies strengthen their military presence in the region, Beijing faces heightened scrutiny and resistance to its territorial ambitions. Take Taiwan, for instance. Any move by China to assert control over the island now risks provoking a far more unified and determined response from the US-led coalition. Similarly, Beijing's controversial activities in the South China Sea, constructing artificial islands and making sweeping territorial claims, will likely face intensified opposition. Russia's growing influence in North Asia adds another layer of complexity. Traditionally, China has maintained a dominant position in its relation with North Korea, acting as Pyongyang's primary benefactor and strategic guide. However, as North Korea strengthens its ties with Moscow, Russia is beginning to emerge as a significant player in the region. If North Korea continues to align itself more closely with Russia, Beijing's influence over Pyongyang could diminish significantly, leaving China struggling to maintain its footing in a region increasingly shaped by shifting alliances and rising tensions. Xi Jinping now faces a precarious balancing act. China needs to sustain its partnerships with Russia and North Korea to maintain geopolitical clout. However, it's acutely aware that any further escalation could backfire, forcing Beijing to choose between supporting its allies and safeguarding its vital economic ties with the West. Historically, China has relied on quiet, behind-the-scenes diplomacy to keep North Korea in line, leveraging its economic lifeline to influence Pyongyang's decisions. However, Kim Jong-un's recent defiance shows a troubling shift, one where North Korea appears increasingly willing to act independently, prioritizing its regime's interests over Beijing's guidance. For Xi, this isn't just an embarrassment. It's a strategic nightmare threatening to unravel decades of careful planning. As this crisis deepens, China's risks multiply. Its influence over North Korea is waning, just as the US, South Korea, and Japan are forging stronger ties to counterbalance Beijing's ambitions in the Indo-Pacific. This growing alignment further isolates China and challenges its long-held regional dominance. China emphasizes peace talks and political solutions as a stabilizing force amidst global tensions. This carefully crafted narrative helps Beijing protect the image of a responsible global power, starkly contrasting the aggressive actions of its allies, North Korea and Russia. However, this strategy comes at a cost. Many in the West view China's neutrality as a convenient excuse to avoid taking meaningful action, particularly against Russia. If Beijing fails to address the growing threat its allies pose, it risks a significant blow to its credibility on the global stage. The stakes are high. North Korea's actions are already bringing together the US-aligned nations, South Korea, Japan, and the United States, forming a more vigorous opposition to China's influence in the Indo-Pacific. This growing trilateral alliance isn't just about symbolism. It's backed by tangible commitments, including joint military exercises that communicate unity against North Korean aggression and Beijing's regional ambitions. For Beijing, this growing alignment is a nightmare scenario. The enhanced military ties between these nations threaten China's dominance in Northeast Asia and ripple across the broader Indo-Pacific. Countries like Australia and India are also closely watching these developments, with some adjusting their strategies in response. China's cautious approach may have bought it some time, but the cost is mounting. If Beijing continues to sit on the sidelines, it risks losing its regional dominance and global reputation as a credible power broker. The clock is ticking, and the stakes couldn't be higher. So what do you think? Can China regain control over this fragile alliance? Or has it already lost its grip on the situation? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.